Hey there, and welcome to the Total Potential Podcast. I'm Cole here with Jake today, and we are so jazzed because we have a phenomenal guest joining us today, Dr. Laura Pence. And I mean, talk about like such an important background and such an important area of work that we get to share with our audience. Like, we're just incredibly grateful. Dr. Pence has a doctorate in psychology. She is the founder of Lifebox, which I'm currently on card 55, and it's a doozy. So I'm taking some time with it. um, and she's the chief mind doc at Spartan and has a new book out with Joe De Sena called 10 Rules for Resilience, Mental Toughness for Families. And like, this is an important book. It is remarkable. It is excellent. And so we can't just wait to dive in. And Dr. Pence, thank you so much for being here with us this morning.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. The intros are always so bizarre because it's like, oh yeah, I am that. Oh yeah, I do that. So I appreciate it. Thanks so much. I'm excited for us to chat.
Yeah. I mean, my first question is, how did you ever cross paths with Joe De Sena?
Oh my gosh, right? Yeah, so it's so funny how the universe works. I was actually at a point in my own career. I had been in private practice for about 8 years, and I was feeling really like itchy. Like I just wanted something new and different, but I didn't know what that was. And I was also at a place in my career, gratefully and fortunately, where I was doing incredibly well financially. So there was kind of this like, well, why do you want to shift though? Like the money's coming in, like things are great, like what is this nagging feeling that you're having to want to do something different? And I'm not kidding. Like the week that I was telling my husband all about that, I get this random phone call from a producer who says that he's working with a gentleman named Joe De Sena, who is the founder of Spartan. Have you heard of it? And I was like, I think it's like one of those Mutter kind of things. And at that time, Tough Mudder was our competitor. So it was very like, well, yes, but no. And anyway, he went on to explain that they were doing a documentary really about how people get motivated to change. And Joe and his friend at the time, Cal Fussman, who also has a podcast and is a writer for various media outlets, really had sort of like two different thoughts of how people get motivated. Joe really believes that you have to take, obviously, sort of like the hard hitting approach of like dive in, do what you have to do, figure it out. And Cal had a little bit of like the softer approach of like, you have to understand where someone's coming from first and kind of talk to them through the lens of empathy. And so they wanted to come to my office and basically do like a therapy session with the two of them, and put it on camera. And I think that they like had just done a Google search for like somebody that was an expert in the mind-body connection. And because at that time I had worked significantly with people who had eating disorders, I think my name was just kind of high up on the Google search. So anyway, long story longer, they came into my office. We did this session and Joe and I just really hit it off. We were using I was using words that he uses all the time. And I was saying things that he's like, I say that. That's so weird. I've always thought that. And so, one of the incredible things about Joe, I think one of the things that he's so good at, is recognizing when somebody can fill a need for him, and so I think he at that time was really also understanding that there is a mindset piece to resilience and to transforming lives. And so he just, within 30 minutes of us spending time together, was like, I want to do something with you. Like, I don't even know what it is, but I need to have you on board. And that's how we met.
That's remarkable.
That's great.
I love that story. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
In the best possible way.
Yeah, in the best possible way. And I think it's one of those stories where I always look back and I think to myself, like, just that simple yes to this producer who I didn't know much about the company. I did my due diligence to make sure that it felt like a company that I could support and get behind. But just that simple yes, and like opening up the door to something that was unknown, uncertain, and that I didn't know, has like transformed and completely pivoted my career in some ways, in the best of ways, which I hold on to all the time, because, you know, I think sometimes we're scared to say the big yeses to things that we don't know the future of. And so to me, that was sort of like my really first big yes, of pivoting out of something that was really comfortable for me. I mean, private practice at that point was incredibly comfortable. And so that big yes has sort of taught me the lesson of how important those yeses can be.
It's so remarkable, because amazing that like that resilience piece showed up even back in like that type of an experience, right?
Sure.
Like, because doing that hard thing for a lot of people isn't a yes, right? Like there's a real pull to stay in the comfort that they've created, and
Totally.
so fearful to go forward. So that's really cool. I'm so interested to know, like, why this book right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and it's interesting because we're getting, in some of the media that we're doing around the book, lots of people are assuming that we wrote the book because of the pandemic. And in truth, this has been like 3 years in the making. I remember Joe's third book, The Spartan Way, came out, and I read that, and I sent him a text message that just said, you know, great book. You need to do kids next. And he, you know, again, Joe being Joe, was like, let's do it. And within less than 24 hours, I think we were on the phone with like another editor and starting to get the ball rolling. And then along the way, you know, I mean, you guys know, writing a book is an endeavor. It is a project. It's something that you take out and focus on for, you know, a solid 15 days. And then you kind of forget about it for 3, and then you focus on it again. And like, you know, so, but I think I for sure have been seeing in my own private practice, things go from bad to worse when it comes to parents that are coming in with feeling more and more pressure and having less and less skills. And they're hustling, they are over parenting, they are pandering, they are just trying to keep up, and like barely being able to take a breath, but not really realizing that they're the ones that are like strapping the cement blocks to their own feet and drowning themselves. And because of whatever pressure they feel, because of their own, you know, misguided beliefs of really what a parent should be, what a parent needs to be. And I think, I mean, you know, you can look at the statistics of, you know, pediatric mental illness is on the rise, depression on the rise, anxiety on the rise, all of those things on the rise. People arriving to college feeling totally ill-equipped to handle college. And you can think like, gosh, we really have a mental health crisis here. I think it couldn't be further from the truth. I think we have a resiliency crisis. And I think that we're calling distress and dis-ease, discomfort, disorder. Whereas, and I think you guys feel the same way, like distress is a normal part of life, and we have to figure out how to become resilient to it. And I think parents are so afraid of distress that they're keeping their children away from it. And so Joe and I we're just like, I mean, this is a problem, and we've got to figure out how to get the message out there from our perspective of what we see the problem being, because I think parents and, you know, everybody else can look at the statistics and say, gosh, this is such an issue, but nobody's really asking like, well, why is this an issue? You know, like what's the layer underneath that's perpetuating this? And I think for us, the layer is a lack of resilience.
For sure. It's such an interesting thing too. So I coach high school hockey. And so I see these kids from like 10th grade till their senior year, you know, and part of this writing process for what we're doing, I mentioned that to Cole, is like, I just get this chance to have these observations of these kids that are basically on like that launching pad into the world,
right?
Where they're going to pave their own course and do all this stuff. And it was like, man, there's something here, right? Where I just see them in this little arena of their life in the hockey aspect of it, where one little thing goes wrong and it's just like total collapse, right? Like just of the whole person, you know? And then that made me think like, okay, I have little kids, right? And it's easy as a parent, especially whatever your own experience was, right? Of like, I'm just going to pave the way for these kids and just, and then all of a sudden you see them as high school kids, you're like, oh no, so
no paving, gravel the road.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I think
And
that's,
I would have many, and I have had worked with many, many parents who come in and just feel so desperate. And, they know something's off and they know that things aren't right. But they're just not sure how to readjust. And so I think from my perspective too, a lot of the books that were being written were sort of assuming that parents had the skills to execute certain things. And I think one of the things that we absolutely have to remember, I know you guys mentioned this even in your own book, is that like, you have to, in order to raise a healthy human, you have to be a healthy human. In order to raise a resilient human, you have to be a resilient human. In order to set boundaries with your kids, you have to know how to set your own boundaries with yourself. And so for us, each chapter in the book is really structured in a way so that the reader, parent or non-parent, like learns these principles for themselves first, so that they can then execute within the system of the family.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually one of my favorite parts about your book is it's super actionable. Like, yes, here's the idea, but then let's do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is really awesome and so important, because something I say all the time is like, the practice is the teacher, and you have to be doing something to learn the thing and embody that thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
From your perspective, if there are more mentally tough, resilient families in the world, what is available? What becomes possible? Like, how does that shift the landscape from your perspective?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So many things. That's such a great question, Cole. I think, I think first of all, like just economically speaking, if we were more healthy mind and body, we would be way less of a burden on our healthcare system. And so like economically, we could put more in, we could allocate particular dollars that we are spending on, on sick kids and sick parents towards, towards other things in our country that can make our country better as a whole. And so I think like from that perspective, it just sometimes seems like a no-brainer to me. It's like, I want to live in the best country in the world. And I know that America loves to think that we are the best country in the world. And I'm not saying that we're not, but I think that we could be so much better. And I think that we could be a more resilient country. And listen, that being said, I also think that we could, when we focus on being resilient and when we focus on all of the things that we talk about in the book, and I know you guys talk about it in your book too, things like commitment, things like positivity, things like discipline, then we begin to connect more with each other. We begin to actually like each other. And support each other and rise like all of us up together. And so I think like from my perspective, one of the things that I focus on with all of my clients and help them and try to help them see themselves is that like everybody has a unique contribution to make on this planet. But you can't be making that contribution if you're not showing up. And if you're not healthy, and you definitely can't be making that contribution from a hospital bed. And so in order for all of us to make the contribution that we were put on this planet to make, we all have to work towards being our best self, our most resilient self, our most present self. So to me, I think there's so many things that are possible, things that I don't even know. That could arrive if we all were to execute some of the principles within this book.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what comes to mind when you were saying that too is I think about this all the time. I guess the benefit of where we live is a lot of times we don't have a lot of like actual like real struggle. So one thing that we talk about in our family a lot is like some of the struggle needs to be manufactured,
Totally.
like doing hard things and doing them together. And what's your take on that as far as like how you turn that word into especially for kids, right? Because they go out into the world and they hear like, oh, we don't want to struggle. Everything wants to be good, 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 good.
Yeah.
How do you see like shifting that mindset to helping especially young kids with the idea that struggling is actually what our experience is supposed to be?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think here's the thing about kids that I think is it's just so interesting to me to watch. And I have two. So I've got a 10-year-old boy and a 7-year-old boy. Is that they're up for the challenge, man. Like they come into the world with resilience already and with an interest in being challenged. Like imagine the little baby that's, 18 months, I forget the milestones, forgive me, 18 months sitting on the floor, wants to stand up and, starts to pull him or herself up onto the coffee table, right? And then sees the toy over there, wants to lean down and grab it too, knows that like they're off balance, but is like, F it, I'm going to try and get that toy anyway. It's like, so kids have courage already. We take it out of them. We're the ones that are like, oh, I'll get it for you. I'll get it for you. And so I think, from my perspective, so all that to say that I think we have to just have honest conversations with our children about like, life is tough, man. Like today, for example, perfect example, my kids got exposed to COVID on their bus route. And in 4 days, I have to go on a trip, which will take me out of the house for 3 weeks. And I absolutely am like, I cannot get sick. So I'm going to pull you guys from the bus and I'm going to drive you to school for the next few days just to be safe. That was like the worst thing in the world to them. Like, oh my gosh, we can't socialize on the bus, and it's like, dudes, like, and I just said to them this morning, I was like, you got, like, you're not taking the bus. Would you like to go to school with, no clothes on your body? Like, this isn't that big of a deal. We're just not taking the bus here, guys, and I kind of just like scrunch my face up to them and look at them like, really? Is this what we're having like a meltdown over, is not taking the bus? So to me, it's just kind of having these honest conversations with them about like, come on, dudes, like life sometimes doesn't go in your favor. Right. But I do think that one thing that parents like get in trouble, where they get in trouble, is that it just, what can feel like a really big deal to a kid, of course, it's their reality. It's a big deal. Them not taking the bus today was a big deal. It was a catastrophe. They're going to miss out on the social aspect of that. Don't let it become your big deal. Understand that it's their big deal and don't minimize that necessarily, but also it doesn't have to be your big deal. It's like, okay, they're going to be bummed about the bus. Life goes on. What would you guys like for a snack today? It's like, we're not going to spend 30 minutes talking about this. So I think parents need to move away sort of from this idea that like everything has to be a long discussion, that I think parents have conflated validating feelings for pandering to the feeling. Like for me to say to my child, dude, I get it. You're bummed. I totally understand that, man. I would be bummed too if there was this like 10 minutes that I got to spend with my kids from a social perspective and I didn't have that anymore. I get it, man. That right there is validating feelings, but like sitting down and having a 45-minute conversation around, oh, I'm so sorry I can't take you to the bus today, guys. Like that to me is like, we don't need that. We definitely don't need that. And here's why: kids aren't going to get that at work. If something's going, if they enter the workforce at age 25 and, something doesn't go their way, they're not always going to get a 45-minute conversation with their supervisor. Sometimes it's just going to be like, yeah, that happened.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So anyway, Jake, I'm not sure if I completely answered your question, but I do think that especially if you're in a situation where your children are quite comfortable most of the time, I think becoming, and I know you guys talk about this in your book, becoming aware of, where the comforts are and where you can weave in some discomfort, I think can be helpful. And it can be so small, like literally just, you're all sitting around the table for dinner. One of your children finishes their glass of water. Mom, can you get me some more water? Nope. You can get it yourself though.
Right.
Yeah.
We're so used to saying, yeah, I got it, but it's in that moment, just saying, nope, you got it, dude. Fridge is over there.
Yeah.
That's easy, right? I mean, that is a simple way to start showing these children that like, oh, okay, he's got to get out of his chair and go to the fridge. And that, like, it's not that big of a deal. But to them, those small little moments of building self-reliance are building a lifetime of resilience.
Yeah, I love that you're highlighting that this happens both in like teeny tiny little moments and also the really big life moments where maybe you have really manufactured like a really kind of challenging or not fun experience, or life just contacts you, or these like daily little moments. And what it's bringing up for me is something you talk about in the book that I think is so important from kind of that embodiment perspective, like we briefly mentioned earlier. You talk about resilience data points.
Yes.
Right? Like having these pinpoint, like I cannot wait to hear
Yeah.
your perspective on that and how we utilize those resilience data points to become resilient people.
Yeah, totally. Well, it's interesting because that really actually came out of my work with individuals who were struggling with eating disorders. Because one of the things that often I would hear in my sessions with people is like, I can't, as they're moving towards recovery, talking about recovery, I can't, like, I just can't do this. I can't stay committed to the program. I can't change the way that I'm doing things. And I would point out to them, you keep telling me that you're like, you can't commit to something. Wow, did you commit to anorexia for a really long time? You know what I mean? And so I started sort of realizing that, like, hold up here. There's a whole bunch of data points that we can extrapolate. Yes, from perhaps unhealthy patterns and unhealthy behaviors. Like that was sort of the content of what was happening. But the process was this data point of X, Y, and Z, a data point of commitment, a data point of really dialing into what one needed at one time, and a data point of resilience. And so to me, I started thinking about it as these resilience data points. And obviously, because Joe and I just weirdly enough speak the same language so many times, he was like, yes, he's like, I talk about this too. And so we really felt like it was critical to put in the book, because I think one of the things that people get wrong is that, if you ask, I mean, just anybody listening right now, if you think of like, who's the most resilient person you can think of in your life, you'll probably think of somebody who's gone through something really extraordinarily difficult, right? Like somebody who's been through a significant trauma. Because often when we think of resilience, we think of that. We think of people who were in a horrific car accident or something of the sort and came through. We think of people who have gone off to war and come back. But the truth is that we are all resilient. And at moments in our life, no matter how small, we have shown resilience. Even, the sixth grader that gets picked last for kickball and doesn't at all want to go out on the field and play that position all the way in the back where the ball never gets hit, but they go, and they fight all of those voices inside of them telling you, nobody wants you on the team. Don't even go out there. What's the point? You're not going to get the ball, but they walk out anyway. It's like, even that is just a small little tiny moment of resilience. And so if we can start to become more introspective and reflect on, what are my resilience data points? What are the moments in my life when I've demonstrated resilience? And maybe right now it's hard for you to even think about it as resilience, but to Joe and I, resilience is really about recovery and rebound, taking your circumstance and executing, and then learning from it and growing from it. And so I think if we can all tally up and take inventory of our resilience data points, I think people would be surprised at actually how many they have.
No kidding.
I think that's absolutely awesome when you were saying with your example with the patient that has anorexia too, right? Of using, shifting the mindset of like, I don't want to be this way anymore.
Right.
But then going back to, well, but you were committed, you were, you had a plan. There was a ton of resiliency that you did with that negative behavior.
Exactly.
What an awesome way to shift that into now just use those skills just down a different road,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Totally. Yeah. I think it's really important for people to remember that, because what people want to do is they want to amputate particular parts of their lives that were really hard for them, or where maybe they made some wrong or not so great choices, or did some things that certainly weren't healthy. And I think actually, like, we need to integrate, like, find in there what actually was working for you, or what need you were trying to meet, and remind yourself that, like, oh, I'm capable of that. And then use that as fuel moving forward.
Yeah, that is awesome.
Yeah, I love that so much. What about relating to failure?
Mhm.
Because you guys talk about failing forward, and I think that phrase in and of itself is so valuable, because for most of us, the relationship to failure is that it's going to be like a step back and regression instead of the thing that propels us forward. How do we relate to that with yes, it starts in us, like we have to be the leader and lead by example, but then how does that like transition into the family unit?
Yeah. So I think in a couple ways, right? So I think, first of all, I think we have to get really more comfortable as a family unit using the word failure. I think, nobody likes that word. I used to, when I had my podcast, I used to ask people at the end of my podcast, like, what was your biggest failure? And many people, not many, some people would say, like, oh, well, I don't really use that word because nothing is a failure. Which to me, I get it, but honestly, it's like, well, why not use that word? Like, it's if you're telling me there's nothing wrong with it, and you're telling me that, like, failure happens to all of us, then let's use the word. So I think it's okay. Not only do I think it's okay, I think it's important for the family system to begin to use that as part of their vernacular. And this starts for sure with parents being able to name their own, like, oh man, I totally failed at that today, and like, you know what, I also learned this awesome lesson, or when you pick your kid up late, and they're like, Mom, you were late. I know, dude, I failed. I'm sorry, man,
Yeah.
So I think just like becoming a little bit more comfortable with it, because as we know, words matter, but we don't want to give words more power than they actually have, especially when we see failure as something that you absolutely can do forward, in the sense that you can gain wisdom from, and in the sense that it is an essential part of being human. It is an essential part of being human. And so I think for parents who are terrified, and oh my gosh, have I met so many parents who are terrified of their kids failing. I think one of the things that, like, I would want parents to consider is, okay, so what are you really afraid of, though? Well, I'm afraid of them failing. That they go there again. And it's like, okay, I get that, though, but go a layer deeper. Like, what are you really afraid of? Right. And then I get lots of different answers. So I might get, well, I'm afraid that then they won't have any friends, or I'm afraid that they'll get kicked off the team and then they'll be alone. Or I'm afraid that if they fail that class, then they'll have to be put in the class with the kids who are having a hard time, and then they'll be labeled for the rest of their life. And then they'll never get a job. And then, they'll be homeless. Like, I've literally heard it all. Right. But I think that's a really, really good question for everybody to ask themselves, is like, what am I really afraid of if my child fails? And am I somehow linking their success to myself and an extension of my own parenting? That if they fail, then maybe I failed too. And that is when we begin to really recognize the unhealthy enmeshment that parents have with their kid, that their child becomes an extension of their own idea of success. And I understand that that's really hard to uncouple. If your child doesn't do well at something, it's really hard as a parent to not consider, like, oh man, where did I mess up? Like, was I not on them enough about their homework, or did I not practice enough with them for them to make the team? Like, we often sort of come back to, what didn't I do? But the truth is that our children are not an extension of us. They are their own entity. And so we really need to sort of like do some decoupling around that a little bit. And I think failure is, I think it's important to talk about with kids. And I think, I talk about this, or Joe and I talk about this in the book too, that like, what are the grades that go, what are the papers that go up on the fridge? They're the A's, right? It's like, put an F up there, to be like, oh, that happened. You know what I mean? Like, what we learned from that. And then maybe have your child write on a Post-it note what they learned and slap it right up alongside the F. I just think that we're so afraid of it. And it's sometimes, I understand that certainly there are times in life when failure is it's gonna kick you, and it's gonna hurt, and it's gonna be painful, and it's not fun. But it's really essential to have your children experience failure and for you to fail. I had a massive failure in front of my children. April of this year, I had trained for an ultra marathon for a 50 mile. I had literally to that point never even done a 5K. I had only done Spartan races. And I had trained for like 8 months, and, the training for that is intense. And sometimes you're gone for 3 hours, and so my children watched me train really hard for this thing. And they came to the event with me. And they were at the last aid station, which was like mile 42. And I came in, and, they were there with the Theraguns and the water and like doing all the stuff, and like, you could do it, Mom. And I was, oh my gosh, I was just like the worst pain. I was crying. And I was like, okay, I'll go out, I'll go back out. And I went out. And then, a mile later, I texted my husband and I was like, I can't do it. And so he came and he drove by, and I leaned in the car and I was like, I just don't want to do it anymore. And he was like, well, and he sort of said something to try and get me back out there. And my 7-year-old was like, well, you tried. But my 10-year-old started crying, and he was like, Mom, you can do it. And I was like, I know, buddy, but I just don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. And it really hit him hard that I failed. And, I didn't sugarcoat it for them. Like they, on the way home, they'd be like, you did so great, Mom. And I'm like, I did do great. And I failed. Like I didn't do the 50 miles though, guys. But it was so critical for my children to see in that moment that I could fail and they could love me anyway, which, by the way, they will use as a data point in their own life when they fail, because I will love them anyway. And so for them, and I had this moment where I was like, they're going to watch me. This is going to be big. Like, they're going to watch me fail this, what is this? But I was like, this is going to be like the best thing for them. Now, that's not why I stopped. I quit because I was done. Let's not make excuses here, but it was really important for them to see. And I encourage all parents to consider, like, when you fall flat in the mud on your face, let your children see it, because they will at some point in their life, and they need to know what working through that looks like.
Yeah, no kidding. And what a beautiful example, especially around that piece of like, we still get to love each other. Like,
totally.
Yeah.
At the end, it doesn't change anything between us.
Exactly.
We still have the same connection, and probably even a deeper one now, because we
sure.
have this new experience together. I just really love that.
I think too, I was just going to ask you, the rawness of the language, right, that we use. That's a very interesting thing. I'd be curious on that, because is there anything that you would ever stay away from as far as like, when you talk about failure, right? Or like some of these things, but is there any time where you would maybe go where there's things that you wouldn't want to express, or like, or maybe sugarcoat something, or you know what I'm saying? I'm just curious on that. If there is like a tipping point with kids of if you can go too far with your language or not.
It's a great question, Jake. And yes, I would never say to my children, you are a failure, because just like I would never say to my children, you aren't good enough. But what I have said to my children is, that's not good enough. Like, for example, goodness gracious, I asked them to make their bed this morning, and, I walk past and my oldest son's blanket is like half off the bed. And I'm like, buddy, come back up here and make your bed, please. I did. No, you didn't. Yes, I did. It's not good enough. Right. Because, and I know, shame, that feeling that we're not good enough, that we're not worthy of love and belonging, is I'm not good enough. But if we can make sure that we're executing language that indicates that a particular behavior is not good enough, and really separating it from like the I'm not good enough, I think that's really important. And I think the same is true for failure. I don't ever want my kids to believe that they are a failure, but it is okay for them to acknowledge that they have failed. What we're doing is we're separating self from behavior. Like, I engaged in something, it didn't go well. This failed, right? But not I am a failure. And so I think we have to be careful of like using language that attaches identity in any way. Same with you're such a success. Nope. Yeah. That was a success. You know what I mean? So even the positive language too, I think is really important for us to be careful of. Because as much as we can remind ourselves that like what happens outside of us happens outside of us, and that our identity can remain intact despite not making the bed well enough, not, failing the class, all of that kind of stuff. Like if that's where we begin to really see, people attach their identity to what they're doing and everything that they're executing and how they're behaving, which I think can be pernicious, like it can be a little bit dangerous. And so it's a great question, Jake. And I would encourage parents to really consider what kind of language you're using around things like that wasn't done well enough versus like, you're not good enough,
Yeah.
That really
I love that.
Oh, go ahead, Jake.
No, I was just going to say just detaching the individual from the event. I think that's a really cool concept for parents for sure.
And also kind of grows like not only that resilience, but like that growth mindset piece. Like it's
Exactly.
the effort. You can do anything. This can be better. This could be different. There's so many choices. It's just like, what are you putting into it? But then like from more of like even a 30,000 foot view, I think these opportunities to teach our children awareness in these small little ways, is like such a gift to them, because at some point, you're not that behavior. You are not that thought. Exactly. You are not that emotion. You are something so much more vast and interesting and like full of possibility than any one action, any one thought. And so these little moments to share that with them seems so powerful too.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, I love that. If you think about kind of like the starting point, like if any one family is listening to this and is like, wow, we probably have some work to do in this area. Like where's
which by the way is me too, which all of us.
Yeah. My daughter, we're excited to be talking with you today. And my daughter this morning is holding her lunchbox, her notebook, and the book she's reading. Hey mom, could you come help me get this in my backpack? And I was like, no, actually I can't.
Exactly.
Right? It's like, it's just these little becomings that are happening for all of us. So yes,
they're so essential.
We're doing the work too.
Exactly.
Yeah. But so where does somebody just start to take that very first step toward this work?
Well, I'm a huge believer that the first step is always self-reflection and self-awareness. I mean, we really can't make changes if we don't know where we need to make changes. And I think, I actually think that step too, even though for some people it might be like, oh yeah, that'll be real quick and easy. It's actually really hard and sometimes really painful. Like for sure, when I was writing this book with Joe, there were moments where I was like, oh shit, am I doing that? And there was sorry, I just swore, but he even called me at one point and acknowledged, I totally have been falling into exactly what we're talking about in the book. I'm overscheduling my kids. And we just sort of talked about actually how hard this is. Doing this work, that Joe and I talk about in the book is not easy. And I think one of the first things where parents even get stuck is acknowledging that they're doing it wrong, they're not doing it the way that needs to be done. And I think, by the way, it's okay to even say like, I'm doing it wrong. Like we've gotten so prickly with language around stuff like that. It's like, oh, we can't say that anymore. Yeah, we can say that. It's okay to say that. So I think for parents, that would be my first step for them at any stage, whether you've got no kids and are maybe planning on having them, whether you've got no kids and don't plan on having them and want this book to be just the tenets between you and your spouse or other people in your life. Or if you're planning on having them, or if they're out of the house and they're grown. Like, I think self-awareness is really key. Along with self-awareness, let's remove judgment. It is what it is. We've executed the way that we've executed. We have patterns that are established. Judgment is not going to help. So as you start to walk through, like, what are the ways that I make life easy for my kids? What are the ways that I take away adversity from my kids? What are the ways that I, let them out of things when maybe I should really make sure that they're committed to things? Don't beat yourself up over it, because that's not going to be helpful in any way, shape, or form. Right. So let's just try and remove judgment as much as possible. And then I think you start small, because again, it's like the grand sweeping gestures of change are great, but they're not likely to last. And so if you can start small, I think that's really important. Like Joe, I know, would tell you, what's his morning routine? He wakes his kids up at 5 and puts them through like a whole workout, right? Listen, if you're not doing that with your kids, that's okay. I'm not, so, but what are the things that I am doing to make sure that my kids get some movement in? They walk the dog, they scoop the poop, they mow our lawn, they shovel our snow, you know what I mean? So it's like, what are the little things that you feel like you can do in your family system that disrupt it just a little bit? And know that there's going to be resistance. Like, nobody's going to be on board with this. Initially, they might be like, oh, fun, new stuff to do, right? But then it's going to get old and they're going to get tired. And guess what? They're going to get uncomfortable, because that's what most of this is about. And so there's going to be resistance, and that's okay. It's okay for there to be resistance. Like, so what? I remember Joe at one point, when he did this death race with the kids, kind of like the Spartan kids camp, he called me and he's like, how do I get these kids to stop complaining? Like, they're just complaining nonstop. And I'm like, you can't. I mean, this is where they are in their development. They're supposed to complain. They see you as a threat. In order to survive, they want to stop. So they're going to say something about it. But just not every complaint is worth listening to. Like, you can acknowledge it, but where you have to intervene is the parents. You can't get your kids to stop complaining necessarily. So as you start to implement changes within this book, if you hear complaints, okay, I mean, I get it. I'd probably be complaining too, right? But it's not necessarily something then that needs or requires a shift of course. Like, stay the course, and start small. Start with the little things, I think that would be my best recommendation.
Especially if you have older kids, right? Because there's already been the conditioning that might be really hard to break. So
totally.
With that judgment piece for yourself, plus with smaller tasks, as opposed to at least I know how I'm wired. Like it kind of like you said, right? I haven't done a 5K, but I'm going to do a 50 miler,
right.
Like that's the way my mind works too. It's like, if I'm going to do this, like let's see what I got,
Exactly.
But sometimes, like, I've seen that in my own house, like that's a challenge with my kids sometimes, because they're like, like my son has mentioned to me before, well, I'm not like you, and it's like, oh, okay. Here's a chance for me to reflect. How am I talking? So
totally.
I just, I love that idea of starting small, and then just building that resilience through those small little daily tasks.
Yeah, totally. And, I mean, there are ways to sometimes make it more, I hate to use the word fun for kids, but like, maybe more collaborative is what I might say, where it's like, for example, if you've got a 6-year-old and they normally take a bath or a shower and then they easily pop right out. It's like, hey, let's turn the cold water on and see how long we can last, as opposed to like, you're going to take a cold shower today, like try and make it somewhat collaborative, where it feels like this is an experiment rather than this is something that we're in like authoritatively demanding of you. I think sometimes like that can sort of weave the kids in a little bit more. But again, let's be clear here that this is not their show to run. You know, you as the parents in the household, like you are the parent, you are not the friend. And, you know, Joe says this all the time, like, if you're going to implement the things in this book, you're not going to win a popularity contest in your family. And you're not always going to be the one that mom or dad, or, you know, whatever combination of parents exist, come to. And that's okay. You know, that's okay sometimes, for sure. But I do think that there are sometimes ways to sort of like, make it a little bit more of an experiment than make it a demand.
I'm going to use a word that I hear you use all the time, Dr. Pence, which is that the opportunity to be curious.
Yes.
Like, well, this is interesting. I noticed this pattern, and remove the judgment, be reflective about it. And then just like, I wonder what the move is that could make this better, or could make this situation a little bit more productive. And then it doesn't make it fun, but it makes it like an experiment, a learning opportunity. Like it's just something available instead of a specific thing. And I love talking about sort of the invitation for collaboration, right? Because like my sons are 14 and 10, and they're like really into ice baths, which is super weird to me, but they're like, hey mom, it's Thursday, we doing our ice bath? I'm like, yeah, sure we are. But my daughter's not into it. She's 8. But it's not, hey, we are, it's, hey, would you like to? And you know what? Right. Sometimes she puts her toes in. Sometimes she sits on the side and is the cheerleader for them. Like there's lots of ways this is still possible without it being a very specific thing. Right. And in the book, you guys too talk about like in that collaboration space about creating a family values statement and how fun that can be to like, what do we stand for? And then when things maybe aren't lining up to that, like, hey guys, we decided together that we're a family that works hard, or like whatever those words become. Absolutely. Seems so fun.
No, it's funny you say that, because we did that as a family when we were in a long drive, and you guys know how those long drives with kids can be. And I asked everybody to come up with 2 words that they thought described the family. And my youngest, who was 6 at the time, one of his words was trust, which I was like, you know, when you have those moments as a parent where you're like, yeah, buddy. But, you know, I have used that in conversations moving forward where like trust is teetering, you know, like, for example, if his older brother tells him, you know, like a girl he has a crush on or something like that, and he's like, Parker has a crush, you know, and I'm like, remember that word you used, trust, right? So I think, yes, like that, the values exercise in terms of the family really naming, like, what's the mission of our family? What are the principles we want to live by? Can be so critical as a touch point and as like a reflection point for when maybe things start to go sour, or as sort of like a point of motivation. Like, hey guys, we named it, we were going to work hard. And I see us all sitting around on a Sunday when there's yard work to do, and there's cleaning to do, and there's, you know, this laundry and all that kind of stuff. So what are we? Because it doesn't feel like we're working hard.
Yeah. That's really.
It's awesome too. I mean, it's just like a team, right? Like having accountability to the mission or whatever it is. I think it's really cool how you can peel those concepts out of something like that and bring them into your family. Because I mean, at the end of the day, that should be your kind of main team that you're on, right?
Exactly.
This is the group of people that we're going to live this experience with, you know?
Yep.
So
100%.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Okay, Dr. Pence, I could ask you like a gajillion questions, but I want everyone to read this book. It is phenomenal. It is so actionable. I think it will shift a lot of mindsets about what is the culture that you're creating, and how do you empower your children to grow into humans who have a little bit of grit and a little bit of
Mhm.
willingness to like see the hard stuff through, right? Because like life is going to be hard at some point, if not a lot of points.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I definitely want everyone to go out and get the book. What you have a lot of other offerings though, like your Lifebox app, you have the Lifebox, the actual cards. Like where should people find out all the good stuff about you and the amazing work you're doing?
I appreciate that. I'm so curious what card 55 is. I'm going to go look at it after I'm done.
It's your relationships and the 3 thoughts you think about, the 3 most important people to you. And I was like, whoa, I got some work to do here.
Yeah. So Lifebox is something, is, a product that we've been working on for a while and was put out into the world. And we now have an app, and it basically is a tool for self-awareness and self-reflection. And if you download the app, it gives you a question every single day, along with courses and meditations and opportunities for just more and more and more curiosity and reflection, probably more than you will ever need. And so you can, there's the Instagram handle at Lifebox, LIGHFBOX. And then you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Lara Pence. You can send me an email, Lara at Dr. Lara Pence. However people want to reach out, they can certainly find me.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely share all of that in the show notes and whatnot, so you can find Dr. Pence. We just are like incredibly grateful for you having this conversation with us. And we mentioned this to Dr. Pence before we hopped on recording, but Jake and I both have learned so much because Dr. Pence has supported the Unbeatable Mind coaching program. And so we've had a real gift of being able to learn from Dr. Pence for a long time. And we want other people to have that same opportunity. So definitely check her out and check out all the amazing work that she's doing, because it's really important work and like life-changing, life-shifting, whole new possibilities type of work. So yeah, thank you, Dr.
Well,
Pence,
I really appreciate both of you, and congratulations on your own book. And what a great podcast you guys are doing.
Thanks. Yeah, this is such a fun conversation where
it's great.
I'll be re-listening it to myself, I think, to pull out even more of the nuggets that you shared. So I appreciate you, and hope everyone has an awesome day. We appreciate you spending some of your time with us, and we will catch you next time.